She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Not because she wasn't worth looking at, but because she had spent the better part of 6 years making absolutely certain that nobody would. Celeste Okafor had a system: wear neutral colors, keep her hair pulled back. Don't laugh too loudly, don't take up too much space. She had refined it over years of working in offices, where the unspoken rules were louder than anything printed in the employee handbook. She was the woman who arrived first and left last, who remembered how everyone took their coffee, who could reconstruct 3 years of financial records from a corrupted hard drive in under 48 hours, and never once asked for a thank you. She was, by every measurable standard, indispensable. She was also, by every social standard, she had quietly accepted, invisible, which was exactly why she had no idea what to do with herself on a Tuesday evening, when her colleague Diane had grabbed her by the wrist in the break room and said, "You are coming out with us whether you like it or not, Celeste, and before you say anything, I already told them you're in." The restaurant was called Osteria Morelli. It was the kind of place Celeste had only ever seen in the reflection of other people's Instagram stories. The kind of place where the menu had no prices, because if you needed to know the price, you had already made a wrong turn somewhere on your way there. The lighting was amber and low. The tablecloths were white as a confession. The waiters moved like they had been trained not to exist until summoned. Diane had made the reservation 3 weeks ago on the strength of a birthday discount she'd clipped from a magazine, and she was absolutely thrilled with herself about it. There were 4 of them: Diane, Celeste, Kevin from Audit, and a man named James who worked in the building next door, and had been making eyes at Celeste for the better part of a month, which Celeste had responded to by pretending she didn't notice, because noticing would have meant deciding what to do about it, and deciding things about herself was not something she was particularly practiced at. She had almost cancelled twice on the way over. She had also, for the first time in recent memory, worn red. It was her sister's doing, really. Her sister, a Daisy, who had called her that afternoon and said with zero preamble, "I need you to stop dressing like you're trying to disappear," and then stayed on the phone for 20 minutes talking Celeste through her own closet until she found it. The dress that had been hanging in the back since the tag came off 2 years ago. Deep red, off the shoulder, the kind of fabric that moved when she moved. She had stood in front of the mirror for a long time before she left. She had worn it anyway. 4 miles across town, in a building that did not appear on any public-facing map of the city, Raphael Mancini was listening to a man explain a problem in accounting. Not Celeste's accounting. Different accounting, the kind of accounting that did not involve spreadsheets, so much as it involved consequences. Raphael sat at the head of a long mahogany table and did not look at the man who was speaking. He was looking at his hands. His left hand, specifically, the place where his ring finger had a faint scar. Not from violence, though there had been plenty of that too, but from a fishing trip when he was 9 years old and his grandfather had laughed and called him clumsy and meant it as affection. He thought about his grandfather sometimes when men were saying things he didn't want to hear. "The Delgado shipment," said the man, whose name was Franco, and who had been with Raphael for 11 years and therefore knew better than to stop talking just because Raphael wasn't looking at him. "There's a discrepancy. 40,000, maybe 45. Could be paperwork, could be something else. Which is it? We're still looking." Raphael looked up then, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, the way a tide comes in. Franco cleared his throat. "We'll know by Thursday." "You'll know by tomorrow morning," Raphael said. And he said it in the same tone a man might use to order a cup of coffee. "And you'll know by tomorrow morning because you're going to work through the night if you have to, and you're going to find out whether this is a paperwork problem or a people problem. Because those 2 things require very different responses. Do you understand the distinction I'm making? Yes. Good. Raphael stood. He was not an especially tall man. He was the kind of man who didn't need to be. "I have a dinner." His driver, a solid and largely silent man named Teo, pulled the car to the curb in front of Osteria Morelli at 8:47. Raphael had made a standing reservation here for the past 4 years. The owner, a man named Morelli, whose grandfather had gone to school with Raphael's grandfather, kept a table in the back right corner that was never assigned to anyone else. Raphael did not particularly enjoy restaurants. He found them loud and inefficient, but there were certain things a man in his position did that were less about enjoyment and more about visibility. The right kind of visibility, in the right places, with the right people watching. Tonight it was dinner with a city alderman named Beaumont, who had certain interests, and Raphael had certain capabilities, and they had been in a very pleasant and mutually beneficial arrangement for 3 years. He came in through the side entrance. He always did. The matron nodded without speaking and led him toward the back, past the bar, past a table of women celebrating something with a bottle of Prosecco and small paper crowns, past a foretop near the window, where a man in a blue jacket was leaning across the table and saying something that made the woman across from him laugh. Raphael almost kept walking. He stopped. He was not a man who stopped. The woman at the table was laughing, not the polite, careful, half-swallowed kind of laugh that people offered up in restaurants when they were performing a good time. She was laughing the way people laugh when they forget anyone is watching. Her head tipped back, her shoulders shook. The candlelight caught the red of her dress and turned it into something almost indecent, and she was pressing one hand flat against the table like she needed to hold on to something to keep herself grounded. And she was. He knew her. It took him a moment to place her in context, the way it sometimes takes a moment to recognize a word in a different language, even when you know it fluently. She belonged to the office, to spreadsheets, to Thursday morning briefings where she sat in the corner and said very little and noticed everything. And he had noticed that she noticed, though he had never said so. She was the woman who had corrected a rounding error in the quarterly ledger that had been compounding for 18 months, flagged it in a one-line email with no drama, and saved his organization approximately $260,000 before anyone else had caught it. Her name was Celeste. He had looked at her file once, after the ledger thing. He remembered her last name because it reminded him of a city. She was not supposed to be here. She was not supposed to exist outside of the context in which he had filed her. She was not supposed to be wearing red. She was not supposed to be laughing like that, like she had been holding it back for years, and someone had finally found the place where she kept it. The man in the blue jacket said something else. She stopped laughing and shook her head, and her expression shifted to something more considered, more careful. The expression Raphael recognized from the office, the one she wore when she was choosing her words. And then she said something back, and the man laughed, and Celeste watched him laugh with an expression that was not entirely convinced. Raphael became aware that he was standing in the middle of the restaurant. He became aware of this because Teo had materialized silently at his left shoulder, which Teo only did when Raphael had been still for longer than was situationally normal. "Sir, I see it," Raphael said, though he hadn't been aware of saying it until the words were already out. He went to his table. Alderman Beaumont was a man who enjoyed the sound of his own voice and the expense of other people's wine, and Raphael sat across from him for 40 minutes and said the correct things at the correct intervals, while a portion of his attention remained, with a precision that annoyed him, fixed on the foretop near the window. He watched the man in the blue jacket refill Celeste's glass. He watched her cover the top of the glass with her hand after a moment, smiling, declining more, and something about that small gesture, that quiet, self-contained refusal, landed somewhere in Raphael's chest with an accuracy that had no business being there. He watched the other couple at the table stand and make excuses and pull on their coats. And he watched the man in the blue jacket lean slightly closer once they were alone, the angle of his body shifting, and he watched Celeste tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in the way people did when they were nervous and trying not to show it. Alderman Beaumont said something about zoning variances. Said Raphael. The man in the blue jacket put his hand over Celeste's on the table. She didn't pull away, but she didn't turn her hand over either. She left it there like an object being held, and her eyes went to the window for just a moment, just a breath, looking at nothing, or looking for something, or somewhere between the two. Raphael picked up his wine glass and set it back down without drinking. "Is something wrong?" said Beaumont. "No, you keep looking toward the front of the restaurant." "I have excellent peripheral vision," Raphael said. "Continue." They finished dinner. Beaumont finished dinner. Raphael redistributed food around his plate and ordered another glass of water and said the correct things about the zoning variances. And when Beaumont excused himself to use the restroom, Raphael looked toward the window table. It was empty. The candle was still burning. There was a lipstick mark on one of the wine glasses. The man's jacket was gone. Celeste was gone. The check had presumably been paid, or someone had left cash, and the small ecosystem of that evening had simply ceased to exist while Raphael had been discussing property easements. He felt something that, had he been inclined toward self-examination, he might have identified as loss. He was not particularly inclined toward self-examination. He identified it instead as irritation, which was far more manageable. He was reaching for his phone when Teo appeared again. "There's a situation," Teo said quietly. "At the front entrance." The woman from the window table. "There's a man outside, not her date, who's been watching the restaurant for about 40 minutes. He followed them out. Raphael was standing before the sentence was finished. The man's name, Raphael would learn later, was a minor footnote in the history of a low-level collections operation that had absolutely nothing to do with Celeste Okafor, and everything to do with the man in the blue jacket, whose name was apparently more complicated than it appeared on paper. But in the moment, standing on the sidewalk outside Osteria Morelli at 10:15 on a Tuesday night, all Raphael registered was the geometry of the situation. One woman, one exit, one man positioned in a way that had nothing casual about it. The man in the blue jacket was already 20 feet up the sidewalk, looking at his phone, apparently unaware. Celeste was 3 steps out the door. She saw the man watching her. Raphael could tell she saw him, because she went very still in the particular way that intelligent people go still when they are calculating options. And then she started walking in the other direction, not running, not making it obvious. Head up, pace measured, the way someone who has thought about this walks when they do not want to invite pursuit by showing fear. Smart, a part of Raphael noted, almost involuntarily. He stepped off the curb. It didn't take long. It didn't need to. Raphael had a way of inserting himself into the physics of a situation that did not require volume or speed. He simply appeared between the man and the direction Celeste was walking, and he looked at the man with the particular quality of attention that communicated, without any ambiguity whatsoever, that this trajectory was no longer available. The man took 2 seconds to do the math. Then he walked the other way. Teo materialized at Raphael's right. "Sir?" "Car," Raphael said. Then he turned, because Celeste had stopped at the corner, and she was looking back at him. Not frightened, not particularly grateful, not in the way that people look when they feel rescued and want you to know it. She was looking at him with the same expression she wore in the office when she had identified a problem and was deciding how much to say about it. He walked toward her. She watched him come. "Mr. Mancini," she said, when he was close enough. "Mrs. Okafor." He stopped a proper distance away. "You're aware of what that was." It wasn't a question. He already knew she was aware. He'd said it for different reasons, none of which he'd fully articulated even to himself. "I recognized him," she said, "not personally, just the way he was standing." I've seen that kind of waiting before. She paused. The man I was with. He's involved in something. Yes, she absorbed this without visible surprise. She looked down the street, then back at him. The red of her dress caught a streetlight, and she looked nothing like the woman who sat in the corner of Thursday morning briefings. Or maybe she looked exactly like that woman, and he had simply been wrong about what that woman was. Do I need to not know details? She asked. That would be advisable. She nodded once, processing. The dinner was a bad idea anyway, she said, and there was something in her voice that was almost wry, the tail end of a laugh she had already put away. He talks about himself a lot. Raphael looked at her. My car is here. I have a subway. You are not taking the subway. Something shifted in her expression. Not offense, not gratitude. Something more complicated than either. That sounded like an instruction, she said. It was, he said. Is that a problem? She studied him for a moment. In the 3 years, she had worked on the periphery of his organization, keeping books, running numbers, never asking questions she didn't need the answers to. He doubted anyone had ever described him to her as gentle. He doubted anyone had described him as many things he was not. No, she said finally. It's not a problem. The car was quiet. Theo drove. Raphael sat on his side of the back seat, and Celeste sat on hers, and the city moved past the windows in amber and blue, and neither of them said anything for the first several minutes, which was unusual. Raphael was comfortable with silence the way people are comfortable with things they have chosen. But this silence felt different from the silence he chose. It had a texture. The dress, he said, and stopped. She turned her head to look at him. He had not planned to say that. He had no follow-up prepared. He was a man who did not begin sentences he hadn't already finished in his head, and yet here he was, one word into a sentence he had no conclusion for, looking at the woman next to him in the dark of the car. What about it? She said, careful, not unkind. I've worked with you for 3 years, he said. You don't dress like that. There was a silence. I know, she said. Why not? She looked out the window. He watched her profile, the set of her jaw, the slow breath she took before she answered. Because people pay attention to you differently when you don't, she said. They hear what you're saying instead of deciding what you are before you've said it. She paused. It's a trade-off. I decided it was worth it. Raphael said nothing for a moment. The ledger error, he said. 18 months, 260,000. She looked at him. I read your work, he said. I have, since the first week you were there. You see things other people file past. You understand what the numbers mean beneath what the numbers say. He paused. I am not a man who doesn't notice things, Miss Okafor. I notice things for a living. She was very still. I noticed you. The car slowed. They were at her block. He'd told Theo the address, which he also shouldn't have known, and which Celeste clearly clocked, because her eyes moved briefly to the back of Theo's head and then back to him. That's going to need more context, she said quietly. Yes, he agreed. It is. She did not invite him up. He did not expect her to. She got out of the car, and she stood on the sidewalk and looked back at him through the open door with an expression that he could not entirely read, which was an experience he had so rarely that it required a moment of recalibration. Thursday briefing, she said. Thursday briefing, he confirmed. She closed the car door. She did not look back again. She walked toward her building, straight-backed, unhurried, and disappeared through the lobby door, and the red of her dress was the last thing visible before it closed behind her. Raphael sat back in his seat. Home? Said Theo. Yes, Raphael said, and then, after a moment, the man from outside the restaurant, find out who gave him that particular assignment. Already on it, Theo said. Of course he was. She was in the office at 7:45. She was always in the office at 7:45. She brought her own coffee because the office machine made something that tasted like a misunderstanding, and she set it on her desk and opened her laptop and pulled up the quarterly projections that needed to be cross-referenced against the shipping manifests from the Ortega account, and she was halfway through the first column when the door opened. She didn't look up. She already knew the sound of those footsteps. She had catalogued them the way she catalogued everything, automatically, without deciding to, the way her mind organized information, whether she wanted it to or not. "You're early," said Raphael Mancini. "I'm always early," she said. "You've worked with me for 3 years." There was a pause that might, on another man, have been a smile. He came to stand at the edge of her desk. She looked up at him. In daylight, in the office, wearing his usual dark suit, he looked exactly as he always looked. Controlled, precise, a man who occupied space without wasting it. And also, somehow, different. Or maybe she was looking differently. "The man from last night," he said. "He was contracted by someone with a grievance against your companion. Nothing to do with you. You're not in any further risk." "I wasn't worried," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." She put her pen down. "Why?" "Because," he said, and again the sentence arrived without its ending, and this time he let it sit there, incomplete, and looked at her steadily. "Because you've been invisible in this office for 3 years, because you decided it was worth it. And I'm trying to tell you that from where I stand, it was never worth it. You were never invisible to me." The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere down the hall, someone's phone rang and went to voicemail. Celeste looked at the man in front of her. The man who had once made a city councilman disappear from a phone call mid-sentence. The man whose name certain people said carefully. The man who had stepped off a curb on a Tuesday night, with no hesitation, no calculation, simply moved in the way of something he didn't want to reach her, and she thought about the trade-off she had been making for 6 years, what she'd given up. What she'd decided wasn't available to her. "That's a significant thing to say," she said. "I'm aware. What do you want to do about it?" He looked at her with something she had no existing category for, something patient and certain in equal measure, the way a man looks when he has already decided and is simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "Dinner," he said. "Somewhere other than Osteria Morelli." "Obviously," she said. "Tomorrow. I have the Benedetti audit. Tomorrow. Thursday." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thursday briefing is in the morning," she said. "Dinner is in the evening," he said. "They're not in conflict." Something moved through her chest. Old and accumulated. All of it. All the years of making herself small and still and worth it. And then something else followed it. Something newer and louder. The feeling she'd had standing in front of the mirror before she left last night. She had worn red anyway. "Thursday," she said. Raphael Mancini looked at her the way the tide comes in. Certain, patient, like something that was always going to happen. "Thursday," he said.